I'm speaking with Blaž Torkar, author of Mission Yugoslavia, the OSS and the Chetnik and Partisan Resistance Movements 1943 to 1945, published June 3rd, 2020 by McFarland. Thank you for speaking with me.
Thanks also to you.
So first, how did you get into studying and writing on this subject?
Yeah, when I was researching for my bachelor degree, this was British SOE and the Yugoslavia during Second World War. I saw lots of documents connected with OSS. So because SOE cooperated with OSS, and then I started to research what is written in ex-Yugoslavia states about OSS working in Yugoslavia, and I found out actually that it's not written a lot, just in pieces. And then I decided that we need to make a monography which includes all OSS missions which operated in Yugoslavia in both resistance movements, so in Chetnik and of course in partisan movement. So this started, let's say, 10 years ago when I was in the United States 2 times, and then year by year, I started to research and I published a book last year.
So just for listeners, can you briefly tell them what the OSS and SOE are?
Yeah, SOE was British Secret Service, which the task of was to support the resistance movement in occupied Europe. And OSS was, of course, the first US Secret Service, which was also created with British help at the beginning of the Second World War. And their task was, of course, to send intelligence reports from, let's say, occupied regions, to make research and analysis, to also to support the guerrilla, the resistance movements in occupied Europe. And of course, this was for the US at that time very important in the Yugoslavia case, because they needed to know which resistance movements is fighting actively against the Axis powers. And of course, important was that the US government receives lots of reports what is happening in Yugoslavia, where are the main, let's say, basis of the Germans and Italians in Yugoslavia, for bombing all the, let's say, important industrial places. So all let's say, all reports, political and military, were sent to United States via OSS for the US government by OSS.
Now the resistance movements that existed in these areas at the time, was it just a few, or were there small groups that needed to be brought together and sort of assessed?
Yeah, the problem in Yugoslavia was that we had two resistance movements. One was royal, these were the Chetniks, and of course the other was the communist one, the partisans. Mm-hmm. Firstly, the Allies supported only the Chetniks, Draža Mihailović, which mainly operated in Serbian territories of Yugoslavia. Later on, both movements, the Allies also wanted that these two movements join together to cooperate, but this could not work. So later on, after the Tehran conference, the Allies supported only Tito's partisans. So this was that main decision which was important, let's say, for what happened in Yugoslavia in 44 and 45. Mm-hmm. And the problem was, of course, ideological. The partisans were pro-communist. All other left, let's say, parties were also creating this movement. The Chetniks were loyal, supported by Yugoslav government in exile. And of course, the problem was who to support, and mainly the Allies supported the movement which was actively fighting against the Axis powers, and this was were the partisans.
Mm-hmm. So, just when you mentioned the Tehran conference, where Churchill, Roosevelt, and Stalin met, I can imagine Stalin and his advisors telling Roosevelt, "Hey, you should support the communist group."
Yeah, actually, also Churchill had very important, let's say, intelligence reports, and these were ultra reports. So ultra reports, which were, let's say, decrypted by the British, actually gave new knowledge that actually the partisans were actively fighting against the Germans and not the Chetniks. So this was that main reason why Churchill decided to support communists, which is not logically. But Ultra actually gave this important message to Churchill, and Churchill also had lots of good liaison officers in Yugoslavia. Let's say his son sent him report, if you support Tito or not, Tito will be leader after the war in Yugoslavia. So for the British, it was important that they support also the movement which would provide stable Yugoslavia, united Yugoslavia after the war. So Tito was guaranteeing this, and not Draža Mihailović. The problem of Draža was also that he was pro-Serbian. His movement was not spread all around Yugoslavia. Partisan movement was spread in all republics. So it was more Yugoslav than the Chetniks. And what was the U.S. role in this side? U.S. Government mainly decided how Churchill decided. So they were under his influence. So primarily, Yugoslavia was not the sphere of influence of the U.S. and they actually all let's say all liaison officers in first 3 years which operated in Yugoslavia, all U.S. agents actually in first 3 years were operating inside British missions. Only later on, in 1944, the U.S. intelligence service sent first independent mission to Tito. So if you look strategically, the main of Yugoslavia was British and Soviet.
So tell me what did the support consist of? What did the U.S. do to help?
They sent all sorts of material support, munition, weapons, all sort of medical support, and of course they also were transporting from Yugoslavia to South Italy, to Bari, the wounded partisans, also civilian, lots of civilians. And the role of partisans was mainly to evacuate U.S. airmen, because lots of U.S. Let's say airmen were shot down under the Yugoslavia by the Germans, and the partisans and also the Chetniks helped to evacuate these U.S. airmen. So you have now also in United States lots of books written by veterans, lots of memories how this tragedy happened and how the partisans and the Chetniks solved the lives of U.S. airmen.
Mm-hmm. I'm speaking with Blaž Torkar, author of Mission Yugoslavia. You can find more information about his work on the McFarland website or by searching for him online. If you like this episode of Military History Inside Out so far, please tap the like button and bullseye the subscribe button.
If you want more interviews with military historians or to get daily history book suggestions, check out WarScholar.org or MilitaryHistoryPodcast.com. If you want interviews with writers and creative people or daily book suggestions in sci-fi, fantasy, horror, film history, gaming, and more, check out FullContactNerd.com and my podcast, Full Contact Nerd Interviews. If you want to hear interviews with space scientists, space historians, and technology experts, or get daily space and science book suggestions, check out technologyandspace.com and my podcast, Technology and Space. All of my social media links are listed at the end of this episode. Now back to the video.
So, what problems or tensions or issues might have existed or did exist with U.S. aid to these resistance movements?
Yeah, the problem was that firstly, U.S. aid was used for fighting against the Germans and the Italians, and of course the Hungarians and the Ustashi. But later on, these weapons was also used in so-called civil war. So they said the U.S. diplomats were angry because these weapons were used in fights against the Chetniks and the partisans. So they were not happy with that. They wanted that this weapons is used to fight against the Axis powers. And if you see, let's say, the documents from 43, then developing from 43 to 45, you see that this, let's say, partisan control, supervision of all Allied personnel, which was working in partisan headquarters, this control, this supervision was more and more intense. So all the Allied personnel could not freely move around. So they were all the time under control of the OSNA agents, which was OSNA was the partisan secret service, which it was similar like NKVD in Soviet Union.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like the OSS didn't train these resistance movements that much, especially with the Secret Service. It sounds like they already had something going. They just needed resources.
Yeah. They were not training them, but mainly supporting with weapons. And of course, also they cooperated in some fighting, especially because OSS sent also operative groups. This was similar, like, let's say, British commandos. Mm-hmm. So they sent to partisan movement, let's say, on Croat Islands, these operative groups, and partisans together with OSS operative groups were fighting against the German army, which was at that time on the islands and on the Dalmatian coast. So in some parts they were fighting together, but mainly this support was more support with ammunition and weapons.
Were there any Soviet advisors there?
Yeah,
anything?
Yeah. But interesting is that first missions which came to partisan headquarters were British and US. Only 1 year later, so in 1944, the first Soviet mission was sent to Yugoslavia. Actually, 1 year later.
Okay. How about just the physical, the defenses they put up to the physical security? How did they keep themselves hidden from the enemy? Were these missions sort of open in safe areas, or were they hidden?
They were all the time moving together with partisan headquarters. So they were very good. The security was provided. As I told you, it was not allowed that they move freely around and gather intelligence. So they had all the time the partisans with them, and they were moving with the partisan headquarters, and they were mainly safe all the time. Let's say all the time was, let's say, Lynn Farish, which was the highest US officer at Tito headquarters. Major Lynn Farish was all the time together with Tito, and of course Fitzroy McLean, which was the highest British officer. So they were moving around with him. In some bombing, let's say on that famous offensive in Sutjeska, some of the British staff were also wounded, but mainly the security was provided for the Allies.
Mm-hmm. You know, so thinking, whenever you see World War II movies, maybe not about Yugoslavia, but about, secret Allied operations, you always see them running around in local garb or like enemy uniforms. And, so I imagine, was it sort of like that for these guys, or was it more, safe area, and then they'd go and do a mission and then come back and rest and that sort of thing?
Yeah. Let's say at the end of the war, there were some problems on the border with Third Reich in Austria. Mm-hmm. Because firstly, the US wanted to send missions to partisans, and then together with partisans to infiltrate into Austria. Mm-hmm. The problem was that partisans didn't want that the Americans came in Austria alone together with the partisans, because they were afraid that the Americans would organize a resistance movement which was not under the partisan control. So they were afraid of parallel, let's say, resistance movements which is not communist and under the partisan control. So later on, the US OSS started to send missions directly into Austria, and this was a problem because they were very quickly found by the Gestapo. Why was this problem? Because mainly the members of these missions did not know the area. Sure. That's why they wanted to have all the time partisans with them. When they picked that, let's say, members in US, they were mainly some of, let's say, Slovenian, Serb, Croat origin, but they could speak Serbo-Croat, but they didn't know, let's say, the area very, very good, and that's why they needed partisan help.
Mm-hmm. So what other themes do you focus on in the book? What other details do you get into?
I also write about, let's say, important, let's say, Yugoslavs and Slovenians who cooperated with OSS, so in the United States. Then I focus also on Yugoslav agents who worked for OSS, because primarily when OSS sent one mission to Yugoslavia, the head of the mission was, of course, the origin from USA, was, let's say, US citizen of Croat or Serbian or Slovenian origin. But let's say those guys who were translators, who were radiotelegraphists, those guys were not Native Americans, but were the Yugoslavs. Hmm. So those who also knew very well the English and, of course, the Serbo-Croat language and Slovenian. So how US found these guys to mobilize them into the missions? They were mainly, lots of them were prisoners of war, which were taken by the British or the Americans in North Africa. Because these guys, the Yugoslavs, were earlier the Italian soldiers. How they were Italian soldiers? Because Italy occupied a large part of Yugoslavia after the First World War. large part, let's say, of ex-Austro-Hungary. So this was parts of Dalmatia, Istria, and Slovenian littoral. So British and the Americans very quickly found out that inside the Italian prisoners of war were some of Yugoslav origin, and then they asked them if they are prepared to work for the Allies, and they were happy to work with them because they hated Italians. So that's how they found the Yugoslavs for US missions and also for the British missions.
I've spoken to another historian who talked about how much trouble the resistance movements there were causing the Germans, to the point where they engaged in prisoner exchanges.
Guy Trifkovic.
Yeah, so I'm wondering, so if they captured OSS members, if the Germans captured OSS members or people with them, was it a different situation? Did the Germans, I imagine the Germans treated them differently.
Yeah, there were some cases, and they were normally sent to prison, or in camps they have, but mainly in prisons. And lots of them were saved after the war. Some of them were also killed. So there was not a rule what to do with them. That was from case to case. In some cases, the Germans killed them. In some cases, they sent them to prison. But it was the difference. Mainly if this guy, if this was a normal soldier, agent, let's say, of Yugoslav origin, they were in that cases they were. Lots of them quickly they were killed. Then, let's say, the officers who were the head of the missions, they were. It was much more easier for them to survive. Let's say,
And so the Americans, though, were any Americans captured by the Germans operating here?
Yeah, there were some of them, and they were mainly prisoners of war. And some of them also killed. Some of, let's say, of the American agents were also killed by partisans. We have some cases of some, and also some American and some British agents who were killed by partisans. These were mainly those who were complaining all the time about how partisans treated them. The problem was that let's say freedom of movement, because let's say Alvgar Hesketh Pritchard, which was British agent, was, let's say, one of that typical cases. He wanted to infiltrate into Austria alone, with no help of the partisans, and partisans did not agree with that, and they then secretly killed him.
So I imagine, well, you said secretly, but I can imagine if it became known that this happened.
Later on.
Okay.
Years and years ago, partisans didn't want to tell the truth.
Yeah,
but
so,
this was not often. In some cases are where we can when we actually discovered that they were killed.
So what about the resistance in the Serbian areas? Can you talk about sort of the dynamics there? Was there anything going on, or how did it?
It was different in Serbian. The difference is if you talk about Serbian territories in Bosnia or Serbian territory in Serbia, because in Serbia there was not lots of resistance. It was mainly in that area. They were mainly operating the Chetniks. Let's say the resistance spread more all around, let's say, Serbian territory, but we can say actually that because now there are discussions who was fighting, who was collaborating, which nation was collaborating with the Axis powers, which not. Actually, if you look the partisan movement, actually they were all nations inside the partisan movement. You had Croats, you have Serbs, you have Muslims, you have Slovenians, Montenegrins, also the Macedonians, and so on. So, but mainly in Chetnik movement, they were mainly Serbs. So this is, let's say, the difference between these two resistance movements.
What impact did the OSS have overall? Do you think their help was really needed, or was it just kind of here and there? It was useful.
Yeah, from my opinion, is that it was not very. It was helpful for providing support for the partisans and the Chetniks, but not helpful. Let's say how situation developed after the war. So the communists came on power. Actually, they mainly provided military support, but the political influence was not strong by the US. This is evident, and also if you look the documents, you see that actually that correspondence between Churchill and I think Eden on the other side. Eden asked Churchill, "You see what is happening in Yugoslavia? Tito wants to create a communist regime." And then Churchill said to Eden, "So what? Will you live in Yugoslavia after the war?" "No, me too. I'm not going to live in Yugoslavia. So I don't care what kind of regime will be in Yugoslavia." So actually the focus in the end of the war was mainly were the borders of Yugoslavia with Austria and Italy, not the regime in Yugoslavia. So the problem was, so where it will be the border between Italy and Yugoslavia, because Yugoslavia at the end of the war for the Allies was, Yugoslavia was the satellite of Soviet Union. This was evident until the split between Tito and Stalin in 48. Yugoslavia was a typical Soviet satellite.
So let's talk about the resources you used for your research. What did you pull? What archives did you use?
I used the American archives. So I researched in NARA 2 in Maryland. Mm-hmm. So these archives are mainly the archives of OSS. Mm-hmm. Then I used the British archives in Kew Gardens in London. So these are the national archives. I used mainly the documents of OSS and SOE. So British documents has also lots of US stuff. If you let's say look for SOE documents, you get lots of OSS documents because they made agreements together how they will operate in Yugoslavia. And then I also used the Yugoslav documents, so documents which can be found in Slovenia and in Serbia. So I got documents of both sides, so partisan documents and documents of British and US secret services.
Did you happen to, were there any locations that you visited for any reason to see where anything happened, or was it all documentary research?
Yeah, I spoke with some veterans who worked for OSS and also for SOE and MI-6. And I visited places where, let's say, they landed as parachutes when these agents landed with plane. Let's say in Slovenia you have that partisan airfields where they landed, and where also where some of these Allied officers also where they died. So they have monuments here also. You can find lots of monuments of where they were killed in all parts of Yugoslavia.
So what were the airfields? Can you name some of the spots where they flew in?
One airfield is called Krasinec. Then one airfield is called Otok.
Mm-hmm.
So these were airfields, let's say, made by partisans, and in these airfields were landing the American and British planes. You have also, let's say, lots of that airfields in Serbia. Let's say the Chetniks had also these airfields in Pranjani. And so you had all over in Yugoslavia these partisan and Chetnik airfields.
How were they able to use these airfields without the Germans discovering that they were being used?
Yeah, if you look strategically, you see that Germans wanted to hold, let's say, the main communications in Yugoslavia and main cities, industrial important cities. So Yugoslavia is very mountainous country. You could not control all the territory, so you can quickly have, let's say, free territory, and this kind of free territories in Yugoslavia you had all the time. So the problem is that the Germans, and also at the beginning the Italians and the others, could not control all the area. So all the guerrilla movement was spreading very quickly, and they were creating free territories all the time.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like if the Axis powers even tried to send patrols or small guard posts, they'd probably be overwhelmed and killed by resistance movements.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I'm speaking with Blaž Torkar, author of Mission Yugoslavia. You can find more information about his work on the McFarland website or by searching for him online. If you like this episode of Military History Inside Out so far, please tap the like button and bullseye the subscribe button. If you want more interviews with military historians or to get daily history book suggestions, check out WarScholar.org or militaryhistorypodcast.com. If you want interviews with writers and creative people or daily book suggestions in sci-fi, fantasy, horror, film history, gaming, and more, check out FullContactNerd.com and my podcast, Full Contact Nerd Interviews. If you want to hear interviews with space scientists, space historians, and technology experts, or get daily space and science book suggestions, check out technologyandspace.com and my podcast, Technology and Space. All of my social media links are listed at the end of this episode. Now back to the video.
So what part of this research was most enjoyable for you?
Yeah, most enjoyable was, let's say, when I found, let's say, some Slovenians and the other Yugoslavs, when I found their personal files. So actually how they trained them. So I saw the documents of, let's say, the training schools they were visiting, how they trained, how they were interviewed, and then later what problems they had, let's say, during the training, and how they treated them, if they were reliable or not reliable, did they have communist, let's say, ideas or not, more liberal ideas. So they actually checked everyone, his background. So they picked, let's say, for the Allied missions, the best of the best. So the guy which entered the OSS or SOE courses and later on missions, they had to be in very, let's say, they had to be reliable in a very good physical condition.
Mm-hmm. Did they pick people who were already in the military for these?
Yeah. As I told, they mainly picked guys who were prisoners of war. So these were mainly, the majority of them were before the Italian soldiers, some of them German soldiers of Yugoslav origin, and of course they wanted to join the Allies and to cooperate in fighting against the Axis powers, and they were very good agents for the British and the Americans.
So as far as the Americans who were chosen to do these missions, were they all, was it military as well, or a mix?
You mean American officers?
Right.
Yeah, they were all military. There were no civilians. But as I said, mainly they picked guys who had Yugoslav origin, or Croat, Serbian, Slovenian, and other.
Yeah, I did. I asked that because I would imagine, say, the State Department has people who know the culture and language pretty well, and I wondered if they might have taken some of them, and trained them up,
Of course, you had exceptions. Some of them were not, let's say, did not have Yugoslav origin. Let's say Franklin Lindsay, who wrote Beacons in Night, that famous book, had no, let's say, no Yugoslav roots, but he did very good job in Yugoslavia during the war.
Okay. And I say that because the OSS became the CIA, and when you think the CIA is not military, I guess the OSS was a military organization.
Yeah, but let's say during the war, OSS was not treated by partisans equally like MI6. MI6, they were more afraid of MI6, let's say. OSS was more, these are amateurs. Also, the British looked on OSS, this is not the real secret service. They had a joke that OSS means, so social. So they were joking of them. So later on, they developed, let's say, in a very, very good, let's say, intelligence service like CIA. But during the war, they were not treated equally.
What did you find that most surprised you in your research?
Yeah, what surprised me is that there were so many missions working in Yugoslavia. The British and American and let's say at the beginning of 1944, you had more than 1,000 Allied soldiers on one island, which is called Vis in Croatia. So this was, let's say, for Yugoslavia at that time a very, very, very high number. But in reality, the politics of the Western Allies was all the time, we support the resistance, but we don't send, let's say, army, infantry in Yugoslavia. So the strategy was, of course, don't go in Yugoslavia, and we don't want that our guys will be killed on the Yugoslav territory. We will just support them with munition, with weapons, and of course with small groups, missions, commandos, and this is all. So no large army will not be landing on Yugoslav territory, because in one period there was a fear in Yugoslavia of the Germans and also by the partisans that the British and the Americans will land on Yugoslav territory. So this never happened, but the there was a great fear at that time in Yugoslavia. The Germans even started to build defense on the coast, on the Yugoslav coast.
Mhm.
Also, if you see the movements of the main brigades, partisan, and also the Chetniks, they were moving more to the coast. That if this landing will be, let's say, held, that they will quickly connect with the Allies. And of course, Tito was afraid at that time that the Chetniks and also other anti-communist groups, which were also the Quisling groups, that they will connect with the Western Allies, and then they will start to fight against the partisans. So this was a great fear at that time of the Tito, and that's why also Tito wanted at the end of the war that every Allied mission which comes to Yugoslavia has his own approval. So he wanted to have the control of everything what is happening on the Yugoslav territory.
Since you mentioned the Quisling movements, the sort of, I guess, the counter-resistance movements, did the OSS ever accidentally send people to the wrong groups and get captured? I imagine not, but maybe.
Yeah. But there are some cases that the OSS sent some members of the missions into, let's say, White Guard, which was actually anti-communist, let's say, group, let's say, in Slovenia, supported by the Italians, but they were, let's say, in that case, they were quickly, they managed to escape to the partisan side, but in some cases, they were the U.S. agents were kept by this White Guard, and then they gave them to the Germans, and they were sent to prison. And also, if, let's say, this anti-communist Quisling groups, if they found U.S. airmen, they were quickly sent them to the Germans, and they were sent to prison.
Mm-hmm.
So this is also the difference, because the partisans and the Chetniks were actually evacuating them to southern Italy.
Mm-hmm. Did they discover any German agents or any Axis agents within their ranks while the OSS was there? Do you have any stories where they dealt with that?
Yeah. Partisans were suspicious by some U.S., let's say, members who they I saw the documents. They were afraid that they are actually the Gestapo agents. Mm-hmm. And in one case, this was true, but in lots of cases, this was just suspicions, and they were not real, let's say, Gestapo agents. Mm-hmm. Because lots of members of U.S. missions were actually Austrian and German Jews who escaped before in the 30s in United States.
Yeah.
And then they joined to OSS, and OSS sent them to Yugoslavia, that with partisan support, they will infiltrate into Austria. Mm-hmm. So there were also lots of Austrian and German Jews who were inside the OSS missions.
So I know there's a lot of gaps in information, but was there a particular question that you really wanted to get an answer for, and either finally did, or you still would love to find out?
Yeah, let's say I did not describe and analyze all the OSS missions in Yugoslavia. Let's say if you read the book, you can see that I focused on the northern part. So I analyzed work mainly of the missions which operated in the Slovenian and in one part in Croatian area. So I did not let's say focus on, let's say, on the other, let's say, OSS missions which operated in Serbian territory, in Bosnian territory, or in Dalmatia, and so on and so on.
Was there something you came across that had a strong emotional impact on you, either positively or negatively?
Yeah, you have even today a very a good memory of, let's say, those OSS agents who died in fight against the Germans. Together, they fought together with partisans against the Germans. So this memory is very good preserved in Slovenia, let's say. So even today, or let's say this memory on the airmen which were saved on the U.S. airmen which were saved by the partisans. So you have today monuments and celebrations connected with this memory. Also, the relatives of these pilots are coming back to let's say to Slovenia to see where their granddad was fighting and who saved his life. So this memory is very good preserved. You have also monuments of those, let's say, some of these U.S. officers who died here, and so on and so on. So this is a very good preserved memory. Then you have also very known memory. It's so-called the Raven's Flight. This is operation of saving not U.S. but British prisoners of war. So this is also a very known, let's say, story from Slovenia. You have also one episode on BBC which was played and where was this Raven's Flight presented. So this memory is still very alive in Slovenia.
How many, so as far as memorials to U.S. and British soldiers or people there, can you give numbers approximately how many exist for each?
Oh.
And roundabout number is fine.
Yeah, it's I think it's about 15, 20 in let's say in Slovenian territory. Only Slovenia. I don't have numbers in other parts of Yugoslavia. Let's say you have that monuments when, let's say, some plane crashed, or let's say where the airfield was during the Second World War, or where some U.S. officer died. So lots of monuments you have everywhere, let's say, actually everywhere on Slovenian territory.
Interesting. It's in considering sort of the Soviet government's tendency to hide or not talk about anything that doesn't highlight their achievements, it seems interesting that these monuments were able to, exist and stay in place for all these decades.
Yeah, you mean after the war?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but let's say in Yugoslavia, it was not a typical Soviet regime. So if you see, let's say, the history of Yugoslavia, you had that, let's say, we say copy of the Soviet system until 48. And in 48, then happened that split with Stalin, that's the called Inform Bureau crisis. So the Yugoslavia then started its own way its own socialism, to build its own socialism, and so-called non-allied movement. So let's say that influence from the West came in Yugoslavia, started to come in Yugoslavia very quickly. So let's say also in the beginning of, let's say, of the 60s, the borders were started to open towards Italy. So that Western culture came to Yugoslavia quicker than, let's say, in Czechoslovakia or Poland or Romania. So these monuments were not destroyed after the war.
Yeah. And I guess, and yeah, and I mentioned that because, you think, if your citizens see these monuments, they're supposed to be friends with the Soviet and enemies with the West, sort of, and you see this, and it makes me wonder about freedom of speech and thought. It seems like there was more of it than someone might think.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. What to say? It's still going on, this discussion. What sort of system we had in Yugoslavia? We had different opinion even today. In Slovenian society. Was this a typical totalitarian regime? Was not totalitarian? How much it was liberal? Then you have also comparison with, let's say, with other regimes which were much more, let's say, pro-communist, let's say, like in Czechoslovakia or Poland or Romania. So we have different, let's say, opinions and also studies of the Yugoslav regime even today.
And I ask that, I guess, it makes me wonder how much military brotherhood that existed, or camaraderie that existed during the war, makes me wonder how much of an influence it had, post-war, as far as politics and international relations and that sort of thing, as opposed to, say, other Eastern European countries where the Allies weren't really involved as heavily.
Yeah, but if you look how, let's say, the history books were written after the war, there was much more, let's say, evident how the Soviets helped us. This was evident. Even during the war, you can see that the partisans, of course, they like that they got lots of British and US support, but they in public they all the time try to tell the public that they have also the Soviet support. So Soviet support was much more for the public important. But quickly, let's say in the 70s, this, let's say, researching of the how the Allies operated in, let's say, in Yugoslavia started to develop. So this was mainly when the first documents were released in Great Britain and in US at that time. This, let's say, topic was more researched in Yugoslavia.
Interesting. Yeah, and I didn't mean to go into political tangent there, but the effects of what was done, continue on.
It is connected. It is all connected.
Yeah. So what do you hope? So the book's been out since the summer last year. What do you hope the book does for readers, apart from filling the historical gap? What else do you want them to take from this?
Yeah, it is important for the reader that the reader gets, let's say, lots of information, how not just how the US let's say, saw the situation in Yugoslavia during the Second World War, but from the book you can also got a lot of information. What were the, let's say, how the US OSS cooperated with the British intelligence services, how they cooperate with the Soviet, let's say, military mission, and especially, let's say, how they looked on, let's say, Yugoslav borders after the war. This is also an important issue, and how they supported the resistance movements, and also what is for me most important, why they supported Tito, why they did not support Draža Mihailović, because you got lots of books. There were lots of books published, mainly not by historians, which wanted to to focus that, let's say, Churchill was betrayed by Tito, that Churchill made a mistake of that he decided to, let's say, to support Tito and not Mihailovic. But if you look how what kind of information Churchill had at that time, when Ultra managed to decrypt the German reports from the Balkan Sea, it was evident that Germans wrote that actually that the main resistance which comes from Yugoslavia is partisan resistance, not the Chetnik, and this is important. Not the NKVD agents and communist agents inside British SOE and MI6, and you have all kind of stories that they influenced on the British decision that to support the Tito. So important is, of course, that Churchill got by Ultra the German reports, which actually got him the main information what is happening in Yugoslavia.
Do you know the prisoners of war that were recruited and sent to do this work? Do you have any idea if they all stayed after the war, or did some decide they wanted to go to the West? Was there any choice in the matter?
This is a very this is a good question. So these prisoners of war who worked for the British and the U.S. intelligence services had after the war problems. This is the fact. Especially those who worked for the British. Those who stayed in Yugoslavia had, let's say, problems until late 60s and the beginning of the 70s. So they were controlled by Yugoslav secret service, because they, of course, during the war they cooperated with the Western allies. Lots of them, of course, emigrated to America, to Argentina, Australia, and one part of them were secretly killed at the end of the war. So this is also a tragedy, but these were not. These were mainly Yugoslav agents who worked for the British intelligence service, not the US. We have one or two cases that Yugoslavs who worked for OSS were killed, but mainly at the end of the Second World War, those who worked for the British intelligence services were killed by OSNA, because they were, of course, working for the Western allies.
Was there any information that they suspected they were in danger, or was it just one of those things where?
Yeah, of course. I saw that the documents, they were supervised all the time. So some of them very quickly found out that one of their friends suddenly were missing. And they quickly find out that they need to emigrate to the West. Some of them, I don't know how, survived. They were sent to prison, interrogated, but they could not. They were not accused of, let's say, spying for the West, and they were then released, and they lived normal life. Let's say. Of course, they were supervised, but they lived in Yugoslavia after the war.
It makes me really curious what elements or what factors saved some of them, but others did not. It makes me wonder, was it personal connection? Someone liked them enough that...
Yeah. Also, you had really every personal story is something special. some of them had relatives in, let's say, in the government. Some of them not. That really, this is a, let's say, personal story which is different from case to case.
Yeah, yeah. Did you have any difficulties getting the book finished or published?
Yeah, let's say, now imagine how is if some Slovenian guy writes a book in English. So this was problem. So it's harder for us to publish in let's say in US than let's say for the other historians. So I needed to translate the book. I also had one friend, she's translator, who helped me. When I translated the book, then I needed, of course, the native speaker. So a proofreader who goes through the text. This actually caused me 5 years. I needed 5 years to write this little book, but I managed to do it, and I'm happy.
Yeah, it's I'd encourage listeners to check it out. You can go to Amazon, and it has the look inside where you can open up the opening chapters and stuff, and it looks very interesting, very readable. You know, no issues that I saw. So
yeah, it is. It's not so long. It's short, and I wanted to write in the basic important things, let's say, for US reader, to inform him how OSS operated in Yugoslavia during the war.
Yeah, yeah. So what's your current writing project? Do you have one that you're working on?
Yeah, at the moment, I also I'm writing about First World War in Slovenia and Italy. Probably you know that in Slovenian and Italian territory during the First World War was so-called the zones of front. So this was a part of Italian front. Last part of the Italian front was called the zones of front, and I focused on the last offensive on the Italian front, on the zones of front, which was organized by the Austrians and Germans. And this offensive is also called the Miracolo di Caporetto, Battle of Caporetto. And of course, in the areas where I live was fighting Erwin Rommel during the First World War. So he started his military career in the zones of front. He received the Pour le Mérite for Operation Longarone, for capturing Mountain Matayur. So I am analyzing together with my colleague officer how Rommel, together with his unit, with his Württemberg Mountain Battalion, together with his detachment, how he conquered these areas where actually I live. And this is, of course, important for the developing of, let's say, infiltration tactics, which was important at that time during the First World War, and of course for commanding. So for mission command, which is also today very important. So the mission command and the infiltration tactics actually was used by Erwin Rommel and his comrades during the First World War in that famous 12th offensive. So this is one of the projects where I'm working at the moment, and also the book will be published also in English language. Already it is published in Slovenian and German, and now it is translating also into English.
Okay. How many, apart from English, what languages do you know?
Slovenian, English, Italian, and Serbo-Croat.
Okay. I'm just curious. It sounded like you knew some Italian when you were describing.
Yeah.
So, where can people find you online? Do you have a website, social media?
Yeah, I'm not so, let's say, into these things. They can find me. I have my email. I don't have my own page, let's say, page. I have Facebook. They can get my books, let's say, on the internet, on Amazon, on McFarland page, on let's say, book depository. My books can be found, let's say, some of them on internet.
Okay. And if you want, I'll post your email and show notes if people want,
Yeah, if they research my name, they will get my email. Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. So that's all the questions I have. Do you have any final thoughts or words?
Yeah, thanks for that you organized this interview with me. And I hope that we met also in future.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I appreciate you taking the time to talk about this. It's really interesting stuff.
I hope my English was fluent, that people understand me.
Oh yeah, I think it was just fine, no problems.
Okay.
All right, so thank you for speaking with me.
Okay, thank you.
In the next episode, I speak with Emma Southern about her book on murder in ancient Rome. Bullseye the subscribe button to catch that episode. Thank you for watching this video version of Military History Inside Out. If you liked the episode, please subscribe and hit the like button. If you're looking for military history and general history, including true crime, please check out my YouTube channel, WarScholar, my podcast, Military History Inside Out, and my webpage, warscholar.org or militaryhistorypodcast.com. If you're looking for space history and the science, technology, and business of space, check out my YouTube channel, Spacewalks Money Talks, my podcast, Technology in Space, and my website, technologyandspace.com. If you're looking for fiction, including sci-fi, horror, fantasy, mysteries, thrillers, film history, gaming, and more, please check out my YouTube channel, Chris Alvarez Full Contact Nerd, my podcast, Full Contact Nerd Interviews, and my webpage, chrisalvarez.com or fullcontactnerd.com. Thank you for watching.